Well, hello there, One Life family. It's great to be with all of you again in this way. And let me just give my own shout out to all the dads out there. Happy Father's Day. Way to be a dad. Yeah, you can clap for the dads. Good job. My name is Ben Stewart, and among other things, I'm the director of Uncharted International, which is the global missions organization that you guys partner with. I'm also a family member of this church, and my family attends here. And as of most recently, I am one of the survivors of the first ever One Life middle school Camp Ileana 5-day middle school retreat. And let me just tell you, spending 5 days and 6 nights with 11 middle school boys. In related news, if you want to know what the 7th layer of hell smells like, I can now tell you. Anyways, no, it was a great week. It was a lot of fun, but glad to be with all of you here this weekend in this way. We are going through this series this summer called Mixtape. And this series that Pastor Brett introduced last week is a series that takes us through different sections, different chapters of the book of Psalms. And I love that we're spending the summer on this, and I think the name is great for a couple of reasons. Mixtape. First of all, what Pastor Brett talked about last week is that these Psalms are truly songs. That they really are songs meant to have instruments playing behind them and music playing with them, and that the music added this layer of impact and power and significance behind these psalms. And so as we go through this summer to use our imagination and to realize these are not just stated poems, but that these are actually worship songs that real people in real life situations lifted up to God. But I also love this name Mixtape because it does give off, and Lindy was talking about this briefly, it does give off this idea of sort of like when you would go on a road trip putting together your list of favorite songs, right? And like Lindy, I used actual cassette tapes, and we would put all our favorite songs on the tape, and maybe some of you use CDs, and maybe others of you, it is a playlist on your phone. But regardless, you would assemble these different songs that represented different moods, right? Different emotions based on circumstances or things like that. So for example, at the beginning of the road trip, it was always like the high energy, right? You're in the car with all your buddies and you're drinking the Mountain Dew and eating the Doritos and the Red Vines, and you're like listening to, JT or some T Swift or whatever people listen to when it's high energy and excited, and here we go. And then 7 hours into the road trip, all your friends are conked out in the back. It's a little bit more quiet, contemplative, and maybe you're listening to like a little Penny and Sparrow or something like that. The point is the playlist, the mixtape, is meant to reflect what is the mood, what's the circumstances, what's the emotion that you're feeling. And what's cool about the Psalms is that in this name Mixtape, it really does acknowledge one of the primary functions of the Psalms, is that the Psalms are like the language of our faith. They're like the language of our faith. And we find ourselves able, with the book of Psalms, to open to a psalm in a certain circumstance or life setting where we are celebrating God. We're celebrating His goodness. We're celebrating His faithfulness. We're happy. We're excited. It's easy to sing those psalms. But then there's other times where we go to different types of psalms. Psalms of lament. Psalms of venting frustration. Psalms of acknowledging the sorrow and the brokenness that we experience in our life. Some psalms that don't necessarily even resolve themselves. And so these psalms become for us a really great language of our faith. And we can find ourselves in different places in the Psalms. And so today, what I want to do is I want to skip a few tracks, if you will. Last week, we started with Psalm 1. I want to skip a few tracks. I want to skip a few chapters and go to Psalm 84. Because in Psalm 84, we have what I believe is a crucial expression of one of the core realities of this life. A crucial expression of one of the core realities of this life, because in Psalm 84, you have actually a group of writers. It's a worship band. It's like modern day Hillsong called the Sons of Korah. And they write different songs, different psalms in the book of Psalms, and Psalm 84 is one of those psalms. And Psalm 84 is all about proximity. It's all about their desire to be close to God. It's their expression of a longing to be near and close and in the presence of the Father. I think the reason why this is important, we've been hearing a lot from C.S. Lewis over the last couple of months, and so I want to share another quote from him, because I think he encapsulates what's really at the heart of Psalm 84. What's really, if the sons of Korah got together in their little recording studio and they say, okay, guys, what's on our hearts? Like, what are we trying to get out to people? I think this quote captures it well. C.S. Lewis says this: creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby, for example, feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling, for example, wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. So, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. I believe this is what's at the heart of Psalm 84. That the sons of Korah are trying to express. That there's this longing, there's this desire within them, and that every opportunity the world affords to them comes up empty in trying to quench their thirst. And they're acknowledging that it's in proximity to God. It's in his presence. It's nearness to him that they long for. And so we're going to see this psalm, Psalm 84, is first of all a psalm of that. It's a psalm of longing. It's a psalm of longing. Look at chapter 84, verses 1 through 4. Chapter 84 says, how lovely are your dwelling places. So here they are, imagine they're writing about this, they're thinking about it, they've got like this projection of, oh my gosh, I can see the dwelling of God, I can see his presence. It's beautiful. How lovely are your dwelling places, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, there it is, the psalm of longing. My soul longs and even yearns for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. The bird also has found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may lay her young. Even your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. How blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. I think what's important for us to acknowledge is that there are times in our life where we have that moment of like, I'm not supposed to be where I am right now. Or, oh shoot, I'm not in the right spot. I'm not where I'm supposed to be, right? Like maybe as simple as, first day of freshman high school, you're like, realize halfway through, wait, I'm in English 101. I'm supposed to be in biology right now, right? Like I'm not supposed to be where I am. Or maybe on a more serious note, sitting in the waiting room of a hospital, like this is not where I'm supposed to be. This is not where I'm supposed to be. This is kind of what the sons of Korah are saying is, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, and I'm longing for the place where I want to be. I have this appetite, I have this hunger for it. And again, C.S. Lewis in his commentary on Psalm 84, he says it this way. He says, I have rather, though the expression may seem harsh to some, called this, Psalm 84, this longing that we just read about, I call this an appetite for God rather than a love for God. The love of God, says Lewis, the love of God too easily suggests the word spiritual or kind of like cliche in all those negative or restricted senses which it has unhappily acquired. But the appetite for God has all the cheerful spontaneity of a natural and even physical desire. This is what the sons of Korah felt about the presence of God. It was physical. It was a real appetite. It was a little bit of ironic preparing for this message while I was at a middle school camp, because every morning I would wake up and I would go into like this big, cold, empty, dark cafeteria. I would escape this smelly dungeon of 11-year-old boys. And let me just tell you honestly, it really was a great week. It was an awesome week to be part of in a small way the spiritual formation of these students, how their faith was impacted, how the relationships with the Lord deepened, how the relationships with each other grew. It really was a fantastic week. But if I'm honest, I longed to be somewhere else. I longed. I could smell my pour-over coffee that was waiting for me at home. I could feel my sleep number bed set perfectly at 43. I could taste my own food that was real food. And so every morning it was sort of humorous studying about this psalm of a group of people who were longing to be somewhere else, who had this feeling of, I'm not supposed to be where I am right now, I'm supposed to be somewhere else. I could feel that in a very humorous but real way. This is how the sons of Korah felt. They longed physically to be in the presence of God. Why? We just sang about it a few minutes ago. I love to be in your presence. Really? Why? The psalmist, the sons of Korah, give a really beautiful illustration or example of why the presence of God is so enjoyable to be in. It feels a little bit random at first that they're talking about this longing to be in the courts of the Lord. Now, I don't know about you, but when I imagine the courts of the Lord, when I imagine temple or when I imagine like King Hall and, throne room and things like that, I imagine pillars and marble and gold and majesty. Listen to what the psalmist says, though. The bird also has found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may lay her young, even on your throne, O Lord. Birds? Nests on the throne of God? At first it didn't make sense to me, but as I was reading it more and studying it more, there was this really powerful point that I realized the psalmist is making, is that what the psalmist is recognizing is that absolutely the presence of God is all about majesty and glory and bigness and holiness, but that when we come into the presence of God, we encounter his tenderness. We are accepted, and we experience and receive his tenderness. I mean, think about it. A throne room with birds. These common sparrows building nests. I don't know if you've ever had a bird's nest built on over your front door. Like, it's cool for about 2 seconds until they start building things and eating things and doing other things. It's very earthy. It's very normal. There's crud everywhere. And I love this picture smack dab in the temple of God, in God's presence, because I think what it speaks of is that God is accessible. And when we come into the presence of God, that yes, we experience his greatness and his glory and his beauty and his awe and his majesty, but we also receive his tenderness. It is a tender king that allows a common thing access to its throne. I wonder if sometimes what keeps us from the presence of God is our own fear. I wonder if sometimes what keeps us from the presence of God is our own shame. Friends, if you hear nothing else, hear this, that when you come into the presence of God, you will find and receive his tenderness, his acceptance, his love, his forgiveness, his grace, and his mercy. The sons of Korah express a longing for the presence of God. They understand the truth that in this world we will be offered many cheap alternatives. You leave this room and you will be confronted with many cheap alternatives that are promising you, this can satisfy you, this can fulfill you, this will give you acceptance. And in the end, all of those things that the world offers are empty. So this is a psalm of longing. It's a psalm of desire, of real physical desire to be in the presence of God. Yes, to experience his greatness and his holiness and his majesty, but really because we are accepted and we receive his tenderness. It's a psalm of longing, but it's also a psalm of journey. I love that in the next section, the sons of Korah recognize that our life and our faith journey with the Lord is exactly that. It's a journey. Listen to what they say in verses 5-7. How blessed is the man whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The early rain also covers it with blessings. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them appears from God in Zion. Okay, there's a lot of really rich stuff going on here, but let me just highlight a couple things. Mostly what's happening here is that the psalmist is recognizing that when it comes to our relationship with God, our enjoyment of who he is, our connection with him, it is a journey. If you've been a follower of Jesus for any length of time, you know that it is not like at the moment you become a follower of Christ, everything's great. You've got all the questions answered and all your problems solved and, it's a straight shot and you're good to go. No, it's not like that. It's a journey. There's some really smooth patches. There's some rough patches. There's some twists, some turns, some surprises, some unexpected things, both good and bad. It's a journey. And what's cool is that in these short verses, the psalmists recognize three different sort of sequences or parts of a sequence to this journey. The first thing that he says in verse 5 is, how blessed is the man whose strength is in thee and whose hearts are the highways to Zion. He uses this word highways to illustrate sort of like this common path, this common road. And I do envision this. This is sort of like, the Lloyd Expressway if it was actually an expressway, or 69 if it was actually finished. Like you're on it. It's normal for the most part. Sometimes there's an accident. Sometimes there's congestion. Sometimes there's a detour. But by and large, like this is just the normal way you go. But the trajectory, because he says, how blessed is the man whose strength is in thee and whose hearts are the highway to where? To anywhere? No, to Zion. And Zion, in this day and age, represented the presence of God. And I think it's good to acknowledge that by and large, most of our journey with the Lord is just ordinary. It's just common. It's just waking up and being a parent. It's waking up and going to work. It's waking up and being a student. It's waking up and being a friend. It's coming home and feeding kids. It's coming home and taking care of bills. And it's going to sleep and then waking up and doing it all over again. Most of the time, it's the highways. But that we're moving on those highways in such a way that the trajectory is always pointing us towards Zion, towards the presence of God. But second, the sons of Korah recognize another part of this sequence, another part of this journey. He says in verse 6, they say in verse 6, passing through the valley of Baca. The valley of Baca. Now there's some grammatical genius that's happening here by these authors, because this phrase, the literal wording and consonants of this phrase, valley of Baca, had multiple meanings to it. The way it was said, you could interpret it in multiple ways. In one sense, it gave reference to this physical, geographical location of these certain types of balsa trees. And so the way you said this phrase would recognize that physical, geographical location. But at the same time, it was a play on words. Because also, the consonants and the way that this phrase was written, it also could be interpreted as to weep, or the place of tears. So when the original audience of this song would hear these words, there was automatically this recognition. Because in places like 2 Samuel chapter 5 and 1 Chronicles chapter 14, when this geographical place comes up in those settings, it's always in the context where David, king of Israel, who's also another author of some of the Psalms, is facing one of his most common and hated enemies, the Philistines. There's two specific references to this geographical place where David is in battle with these plunderers, these invaders, these haters of God's people. And so when the original audience of this psalm would read the Valley of Baca, they would say, oh, I know what he's talking about. I'm familiar with that valley. I'm familiar with that place of invasion, of warfare, of plundering. I'm familiar with that place of tears. And I think it's important that the psalmists are recognizing that on this journey of faith, there are valleys of Baca for us. There are places that we wake up in and we say, all too tragically, I am familiar. I know what happens here because I've been there. This, for me, is a place of tears. To recognize that sometimes we are on the highways, on the ordinary, on the everyday, but other times we are in the valley of tears. What's great, though, is that how the psalmist resolves this season in moving into the third part of the sequence. He says, passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. And one of my friends who was talking about this verse, his name's Glenn Packiam, he recognizes that the psalmist did not rename the valley when writing this song, right? Like maybe if the Sons of Korah wanted to sell a few more albums, like maybe they should have renamed it so that it didn't conjure up all these negative emotions, so that it didn't remind people of their pain and their agony and their seasons of tears. They didn't rename it though. They left it the same. And what Glenn Packiam says is that God is not in the business of rebranding our pain. He's in the business of restoring us. Friends, the Christian life is never meant to be lived in such a way where we slap this happy Christian fake cliche veneer over our pain and suffering, but instead we allow God to meet us in that valley, to meet us in that place of tears, and to redeem and restore the pain and suffering, and to replace it instead with a spring of abundance, it says. They make it a spring. The early rain also covers it with blessings, and they go from strength to strength. What a beautiful phrase. From strength to strength. I imagine it's like God coming down and saying, okay, I'm going to take you from this place. I'm going to meet you with exactly what you need in this moment. My strength is going to evidence itself in this way, in this moment, to address exactly what you need. And I'm going to move you from this place to this place. And then when you get to this place, my strength is going to evidence and manifest itself in exactly the way you need it. It is not we move from coffee to coffee, or from vacation to vacation, or from spiritual high to spiritual high, or from Sunday service to Sunday service, or worship song to worship song. Though all of those things are really wonderful and beautiful, but it's God saying, I'm going to move you from strength to strength. And so, when you find yourself feeling hopeless and overwhelmed, let me be your strength that reminds you, I will never leave you or forsake you. And let me take you from that to the next place of strength, where when you're feeling full of shame and condemnation, let my strength remind you that there is now no shame for those who are in Christ Jesus. So he moves us from strength to strength. Psalm 84 is a psalm of longing, it's a psalm of journey, but ultimately it's a psalm of proximity. It's a psalm of desiring to be in the presence of God. And that's what we hear this band saying in the last verses. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Behold our shield, O God, and look upon the face of your anointed. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 outside. I would rather stand at the threshold of the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and a shield. The Lord gives grace and glory. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, how blessed is the man who trusts in thee. Ultimately, the psalmist is longing for God alone. That in that day and age, at the time of this writing, there was a physical temple. There was a place where people would go on pilgrimage in order to encounter the presence of God. But what the psalmist gives us the clue about is that it's ultimately God's presence Not a certain place, not a certain activity, but it's his mere presence that he longs for. And he compares and contrasts proximity. Look at what he says. He says, for a day in your courts is better than 1,000 outside. I would rather stand in the threshold of the household of my God than dwell in the tents of the wickedness. This is like the ultimate game of would you rather. You know, would you rather eat at Chipotle or Qdoba? Well, obviously Chipotle. This is the ultimate would you rather. He's contrasting, I would rather stand. And in another version, it says, I would rather be a doorkeeper. I would rather be the guy who holds the door open for everybody. Have you ever done that? Have you ever gotten stuck on a Sunday and like you meant to hold the door for one person and ended up being like half of one life? And at first you're like, and then afterwards you're like, But he's saying, I'd rather be a doorkeeper. I'd rather be a servant. I'd rather be in an uncomfortable place, but in your presence, than dwelling in the tent of the wicked. Than having my pour over on my 43 sleep number bed. I'd rather be uncomfortable and a servant in your presence, if it means I get to be in your presence, than comfortable in the place of wickedness. Because, he says, the Lord is a sun and a shield. Certainly when it comes to these two words, there's the illustration of light, that the sun is light, that it certainly guides and illuminates and provides a direction and lighting, and that a shield, you could think of sort of the hot, arid day as being a shield against the scorching heat and all those sorts of things. But actually there's even a deeper meaning when the sons of Korah used the word sun, it often represented this idea of restoration. Come back to the valley. That the presence of God is a place of restoration. And it's a shield, it's a place of protection. And then it ends with, no good things does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. The effects of his fellowship are the showers of his goodness. It's like the end of that 5-hour hike through the jungle. And there's that beautiful, cold, refreshing waterfall. And you just start to get into it, and the effects of its presence start splashing over you. This is the presence of God. That when we come into his presence, we are accepted. We experience his tenderness. And in that place of presence, his goodness begins to shower over us. Friends, I want to end our time with an exercise that I went through several years ago, and it's an exercise that I still use today. Sometimes when Kathy and I are sitting around in the morning drinking our coffee, I'll use this illustration as an analogy to describe and to sort of self-evaluate, where am I? Where am I in terms of my nearness to God? What's my proximity? A few years ago at this gathering, one of my friends led us through this exercise where he said, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine you're in the throne room of God. So I want you to do that. I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine you're in the throne room of God. And then he said, I want you to evaluate, where are you? In proximity to the Father, where are you? Maybe you feel such a close connection and an intimacy with him that it's almost like you've curled up on his lap while he's sitting on that chair and you're just incredibly close and safe with him. Maybe you're standing at the foot of his throne and your hands are held high and you're worshiping because you're so in awe of who he is. You're so in love of for who he is and what he's done on your behalf. And so you're just in awe of him and worshiping. Or maybe you find yourself hiding behind a pillar. For whatever reason, maybe out of fear, out of a belief that you're not accepted, out of shame. You're in the throne room, but he's actually pretty far off. And you're not really sure you want to get much closer. Maybe you find yourself standing around just looking distracted at other things, not really caring, or believing that the presence of God is ultimately what you were designed to long for and to enjoy. I want to give you just a few moments right now. Use your imagination. Evaluate, like I do on a frequent basis, where do I find myself in proximity to the Father? And in a couple moments, your service leader will come up and wrap things up. Take this moment right now.